Hello, my name is Erin DeFort, and I am the Vice President of Operations with the SnoValley Chamber of Commerce. And every election, the Chamber does a candidate forum to introduce our candidates to you, the voter. And this morning we have with us Ken Moninski, who is here with District 5, and he will be running for Position 1 for Legislative Representative. All right, so Ken, we're so happy to have you. Could I give you a few minutes to introduce yourself to the voters?
Yeah, that would be great. Again, my name is Ken Moninski. I am a 12-year resident and homeowner in Maple Valley. I'm a husband, a father of two young daughters that attend the public schools. I'm a small business owner. I provide aviation services around the world. I still have to make a payroll every 2 weeks. So, I have real skin in this game in terms of the policies and taxes and things that are imposed by our single-party system in Olympia. Every 2 years, my Democrat opponent kind of comes before the voters and he tells us that there's more that unites us than divides us. The problem is he goes back to Olympia and votes against kind of our common values. You might remember, and I think you do, I ran for the same seat in 2020. And my hope was, after that election, was that the incumbent would go back to Olympia, kind of work on bringing our economy out of the forced hibernation from the pandemic, work with first responders to help them better serve our communities, and focus on fiscal responsibility. At that time, we were looking at a looming budget deficit. Instead, the Democrat caucus kind of doubled down on liberal policies. I don't believe those policies are supported by most of the people in the 5th District, and that's one of the reasons that I'm running. Rather than reform, my opponent tied the hands of law enforcement. Our communities are having to deal with record levels of property and violent crime. At a time when the state had a $15 billion surplus, my opponent raised taxes and didn't provide any relief to hardworking taxpayers here in Washington. The size of government has grown. In fact, it's more than doubled over the last 9 years. The transportation budget, which is really important here in the 5th, was kind of rammed through without any Republican support and included a lot of gimmicks, a lot of tax gimmicks that are going to be really hard on people in the 5th and elsewhere in Washington. And it's going to raise the cost of energy, especially for our most vulnerable populations. So, really what I want to do is it's time to put policy over ideology. It's time to come up with common sense solutions and deal with these issues that I believe were orphaned by the Democrats. I look forward to passing laws that are going to help meet the immediate needs of people in the 5th District. We must support law enforcement officers. We need to make sure that there's real consequences to criminal activity. We need to grow our economy, and we do that by encouraging new small businesses, promoting private sector growth, and ensuring that we can create new jobs. We need to fund our public schools, but fund them in a way that benefits students and make sure that we demand better educational outcomes than we're seeing right now. And I really believe we can make housing more affordable and lower the cost of living by letting people keep more of their money and reducing the burden of regulations whenever possible.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we are going to ask Ken 3 questions that he has not been given ahead of time. So the first question is, as Washington moves toward a future of only non-carbon emitting energy, how do you balance the growing need for electricity with the reliability of the grid?
That's a good question, because I think this is a big area that the Democrat majority, I think, is really erred on. The one thing the voters, I know, understand intuitively is that alternative energy doesn't equal replacement energy. And just because California has decided to aggressively move towards what they're considering to be a non-carbon based energy system doesn't mean it's going to be feasible. And I don't believe it's going to be feasible in the short term for the state of Washington, because the science hasn't caught up with the aspirations to get rid of fossil fuels. I'm very concerned about moving to the cap and trade system, which is going to increase energy costs for everybody, make everything more expensive. I believe in all of the above strategies. So we need wind and solar to supplement fossil fuels. But right now, fossil fuels are still the most cost-efficient method of energy. And while I support and hope that the technology will catch up to allow us to transition away from them, we're not there yet. There's certainly no way we're going to be able to get rid of the internal combustion engine and gas-powered vehicles by 2035, like the legislature has proposed. That's not going to happen. And it's not affordable. Lower income people are not going to be able to afford vehicles that have an average cost of $60,000 a year. So we need to make investments in our energy infrastructure, in our grid, to support the onboarding of more electric vehicles. But we need to realize this is going to be a slower, I think, than expected transition. And we need to look at the cost benefit relationship between these mandates, these diktats from folks in Olympia that believe they can just say it and make it so. And I don't believe we can, because the technology is just not there yet, but we should support it where it is and where we can.
What would you say is the role, if any, for the state legislature to ease growing concerns about affordability, for example, with regard to housing prices, fuel prices, and inflation?
I think the legislature has a pretty big role, because a lot of their policies affect the overall economy for the entire state of Washington. And again, another big area of concern, right? Housing affordability and cost of living, as I mentioned in my opening statement. Housing affordability is a supply issue. We're just not building enough housing units. And through things like the Growth Management Act, through the burdens of regulations, which can add about 25% to the cost of a house, these things are all disincentives to build. We need to make more land available and have a little bit more flexibility through the Growth Management Act, allow local cities and local communities to, better determine how to add housing stock. But it's a supply issue. So we've got to figure out a way and come up with policies that allow development and additional housing units to be built. And that's going to mean allowing developers to earn what is considered a market rate of return on investment for those. In general, things, especially like energy, food costs, a lot of those have been impacted by the legislature through things like, and will be into the future, through the cap and trade policies, the environmental policies, the clean fuels standards. These things are going to probably add over the next 10 years about almost $1.50 to a gallon of gas. And it's going to raise prices for everybody. So we need to look at taxes, fees, and regulations from the standpoint of what's the effect to the actual person living in Washington every day and out there having to buy and to drive to work. So yes, I believe the state has a big role. I believe the Democrats have the policies that they've pushed, kind of based on a progressive agenda, have certainly increased cost of living, made it harder to afford a house here in the state. And I think we need a change in Olympia to try and correct that course.
Okay, your final question. Washingtonians have become increasingly concerned about community safety. What steps can the legislature take to help in this area?
Yeah. It was in 2020, the legislature, I think, really swung the pendulum really far left when it came to law enforcement. And we saw a number of bills come forward that, in my opinion, just really tied the hands of law enforcement, made it harder for them to do their job. I talked to a lot of police officers. To me, this is not really a money issue. I think our law enforcement, for the most part, is paid pretty well for the job they do. This is more of a breakdown in kind of the social contract between law enforcement and the government and the communities that they serve. It's an environment issue. When they feel that the government that they work for doesn't support what they're doing every day, you see the exodus of law enforcement officers from our police departments and state patrol. So I think the legislature at a top level needs to show stronger support for the job that these men and women go out and do every day. And we need to correct some of the mistakes that were made by past legislatures. We still need to have a fix to the police pursuit bill, where officers they can't really chase anybody potentially. That needs to be changed. It can be changed with some simple language to go from, probable cause to, I believe it's, I'm trying to remember the exact term, but similar to what we have for DWI arrests. In addition, we have a problem with being able to go after drug possession offenses because of the Blake decision. The Blake decision by the Supreme Court essentially legalized possession of illegal drugs, and it's really made it impossible for law enforcement to make arrests and certainly to prosecute. Well, a lot of these arrests don't end up with people going to jail. They end up being an intervention that forces people to finally make the choice to get some help for addiction problems. That's where, the justice system kind of can serve a good in getting people on the right path. And the Blake decision has really taken that tool away from law enforcement. That's something that the legislature needs to fix immediately by, all they got to do is really add the word knowingly to the law. If you knowingly possess an illegal drug, that is considered a felony. So those are some things that they can do to promote safety. In addition, we need people in Olympia that are going to prevent bad policy from coming forward. Like there was a proposal to lower the sentencing for drive-by shootings, and that should never come to the floor. And with change in Olympia, we can prevent a lot of the continuation of the movement of those policies going forward.
Okay, I'm going to give you an opportunity here to wrap up.
All right.
Would you tell us, if you had the ability to pass one piece of legislation next session, what would it be? And then give us some final words. Sure.
Well, that's a great question. Wow. I should have thought of that one coming in. The Republican caucus has a lot of good pieces of legislation that even as the minority party in the last session that they've kind of brought forward to talk to the public about. And, I think, one of the things that we've seen I think would be really good is the rolling back of the sales tax by 1%. This was part of a budget policy, an economic policy the Republicans put forward. I think right now, as we live in times of high inflation, where the costs of everything, especially housing and energy, have gone up, I think rolling back the sales tax would really give and provide the most relief to the people that need it the most. That's something I certainly, as a legislator, would champion, along with several other economic policies to, try and remove some of the tax burden and cost burden from folks. So, and I think that's kind of what you're going to see as a theme of my campaign. Again, I'm a small business owner, and I make the payroll, hire and fire people. So I bring that perspective to Olympia, and I mean, I really just think that policy should serve all of the people of Washington, and the policy we've seen coming out of Olympia so far. I mean, my opponent typically, when he talks about the problems with public safety, he tends to think these are complex issues. I just think he spends too much time chasing progressive fantasies of Seattle donors and his special interests. So, send me to Olympia. It'll be one less, I guarantee you I'll be one less vote for a lot of the crappy policies that have come out of there, because I'm running to be a voice for the cops, for small business, for families, and everyone that wants to restore balance to Olympia so that we can move Washington to a better way forward. And I really thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. Right. Okay, Ken, again, is running for position 1 in District 5. Good luck. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.